What is the Federal Reserve?
The Federal Reserve is a quasi-private or a private bank that basically acts as a bank to the banks. I follow this stuff fairly well, and I'm not sure I know what the Federal Reserve is. It's basically a big black box, a big mystery.
Hi, I'm Ben Bernanke, Chairman of the Federal Reserve System.
Hello, I'm Steve Meyer. I'm an economist here at the Federal Reserve in Washington.
The Fed, as it's often called, is the central bank of the United States.
The Congress created the Fed and made it responsible for monetary policy.
That is, the government-controlled bank or a government-related bank that will be the standard for issuing the pieces of paper that will be the substitute for carrying around inordinate numbers of gold coins in order to conduct business.
The Federal Reserve also helps to supervise and regulate the nation's banks and works to promote a stable financial system.
Jamie Dimon is on the governing body of the Federal Reserve. So let me get this straight. The guy who's in charge of one of the big banks is also in charge of the organization that's supposed to be applying oversight to the big banks. Yeah, it's kind of literally like putting the fox in charge of the hen house.
That Jamie Dimon is on the board of the New York Fed is just very consistent with the origins of the Fed, which was this bargain that created a semi-government, semi-private central bank.
The Federal Reserve was set up in the wake of an enormous financial crisis in 1905, in which Wall Street melted down, the economy started to melt down, and there was no Federal Reserve.
At the time of that crisis, the policy response came solely from private bankers centered around J.P. Morgan,
who was the most influential banker, most powerful banker in the country, essentially rallied other large banks in New York to provide the emergency lending needed to get the economy back on its feet. That drew the attention of lots of people who asked the question, why are we turning over the health of the economy in terms of its recovery to J.P. Morgan and a handful of other wealthy bankers? Because it's quite clear that Morgan made an enormous amount of money in the way that he structured the recovery. When the Federal Reserve was then set up, the Republicans and Democrats, you may have heard about this, didn't trust one another enough to believe that if it was a directly supervised entity, that politics wouldn't enter in. And the bankers were very reluctant, for their own reasons, to join a system that risked that kind of political pressure on them from elected officials in Washington. So the bank was set up as nominally independent.
As we learned during the financial crisis, financial instability can pose a severe threat to the broader economy.
So the Fed reduced short-term interest rates sharply, about as low as possible. Even so, output and employment continued to shrink. The Fed decided it needed to do more.
And what it does is it's been going out to the banks and it's saying, all right, we'll buy those toxic mortgage packages from you and we'll give you cash for them.
The Fed bought a large amount of bonds and other longer-term securities, about $1.7 trillion in total.
Because in effect, in 2008 and 2009, nobody wanted to buy any of those packages and their effective net worth was zero.
You may wonder how the Fed pays for the bonds and other securities it buys. The Fed does not pay with paper money. Instead, the Fed pays the seller's bank using newly created electronic funds, and the bank adds those funds to the seller's account. The seller can spend the funds or can simply leave them in the bank.
That's fake money that they printed out of thin air. Fiat money. It's a fiat currency. Ones and zeros.
7 years ago, the Federal Reserve is a totally different animal than it is now. Right now, the Federal Reserve, the closest approximation could be a gigantic dynamic hedge fund with unlimited leverage capability and the inability to be taken to task by its shareholders and investors.